We are here again with another Gray Pages with the Brave Cities crew. We got Hugh, Taylor, myself, John, and Taylor. I know you're somewhere else today with a buddy. Why don't you just tell us where you're at, who you're with, and then we'll just kind of dive in from there.
Yeah, I've made my way down to sunny Atlanta, Georgia, to spend time with one of my best buds around, one of the few guys that I like to talk on the phone with, Adam Thomason, aka AT, aka Black Rabbi. We've been connected for a couple decades now, and done some travel together, and just like-minded in more ways than one. So I knew I had to get him on here today to share about what we're building, what we're desiring and wanting to see. A couple things, Adam, you can share some too, but I'd rather just kind of intro you. He's author, fashion designer, started a record label, planted churches, launched successful businesses, filmmaker, video editor, runs a company here in Atlanta, connected with some of his friends at Reach Records called 3 Strand Films. And man, just the dude has been everywhere, played professional basketball, finishing his PhD, or you're finished with it?
Finished, EDD.
Yeah, finished with that. So kind of cast a shadow on all of us a bit, but also a great friend, like a really good friend to me. And some of my most memorable conversations over the past several years have been with Adam. So it's an honor to have him here, and appreciate you taking the time, and let's get into it a little bit.
I want to know why we're sitting under a Lecrae record thing. Explain that.
Because we're at the actual office, the Reach Records headquarters. So this is one of the rooms, and it's decked out. We got billboard stuff over here and Andy Mineo stuff. So yeah,
he's right out there, but we couldn't get him on today. So
I love it. AT, man, it's great to meet you. I'm so glad you're jumping in now. Knowing you've been rapping with Taylor for a while, I know you're probably well acquainted with the kind of Brave Cities concept and idea. Yeah. And man, I've been looking. He sent me some links to some of your work. I was kind of listening to a few chapters of your book, and getting my head around you a little bit as well. Yeah. And so our last conversation that we had, Hugh just said, hey, you know, all of us in our story, we have this like moment where we were like, something needs to be done different. I think the word he used was like, we had an inkling of like, something's wrong, something needs to change kind of in this church life, in this walk with Jesus, in this thing. And even just, you know, knowing as your book, like the framing of Confessions of an Ex-Evangelical, and there was like a real, like, I just like what I've gathered so far, I really love it. And actually I jumped a little bit to the end. So I want to ask you to kind of tell about your inklings and your story a little bit. And I want, and then for me, just the thing that stuck with me is like when you stop selling fake watches. And I love that. I just was like, man, that works so well about the cost of the real thing. But let me just toss it to you to jump in about that origin kind of inklings for you.
Yeah, so quick summary. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, born in 1980. That's pivotal. The race riot happened in 1967. So white flight happened roughly about 3 or 5 years later. So if you live below 8 Mile, which I did, 6 Mile, the city was predominantly Black. I mean, at the time, it's probably like 96-97% African American. Conversely, the religious umbrella was Church of God in Christ, Apostolic, Word of Faith movement. Malcolm X was speaking Detroit. That was one of his hubs, was Detroit, Michigan. So very intellectual, very spiritual people, very proud Black. And so when I went to school down in Savannah, Georgia, that was a culture shock in so many ways. Like, it was probably the first time in mass, I tell people, the first time in mass that I saw white folks together. Like one of my good friends growing up, he's of Polish descent, but in mass, you saw Black folks everywhere. You didn't see hubs of white folks. So that was a culture shock. Two, the apostolic trend that I was under, or strain I was under, it was big on not questioning the man of God. And so I didn't grow up accustomed to reading the scriptures for myself. So when I went down to the South, one of the benefits, one of my good friends, he gave me a Bible, NIV Bible. He said, hey, read it for yourself. So for me, being able to read the scriptures for yourself, it wasn't the Bible Belt thing that a lot of people was like, hey man, I grew up with scriptures, I grew up reading and stuff like that. That wasn't my story. So when I started reading scriptures at 17, everything jumped off the page. It was this prized like possession, So with that, the thought was, well, if this subculture of, let's just say, Christianity gave me this good thing, then everything else without even discerning or checking it must be good, right? And so through that journey of the next 17 years, I mean, their doctrine became mine, their dress became mine, their way of thinking became mine, their way of evangelism and preaching and teaching became mine. And then you get to the other end of it and you start looking like, hey, the scriptures that I'm growing in, I mean, I can understand you kind of explain it away in the first 5 years. But as I keep growing, I keep traveling the world, I'm like, man, this is not matching what's happening in the streets, what's happening in the waters where people are drowning. We're not there. Yeah, it's not translating. It has no power. And so I just, again, making it very short, I just saw that the subculture had no power. But at that time, I'm 17 years in, half of my life. And so I got to make a decision of, am I going to stay in a tradition? Because that's where all my relational equity is. Or am I going to follow at that time, like the inkling of God to say, you got to show me something else because this all I know, And I would say that was probably the major disruption in that just that umbrella. And I would say a key place that kind of manifests that was Flint, Michigan. That was probably like my last time I replanted a church. And bro, when I went up there, you up here talking about preaching, teaching, theology, and yada, yada. And these people are like actually poor, actually crackheads in your home group and stuff like that. I'm just like, bro, this ain't working. This don't have power, right? So what I had to do is I had to not even figure out something, didn't I? Actually had to live the scriptures, I had to flesh them out. So those are some of my initial thoughts.
So tell us a little bit about what that led you into then. I know Taylor rattled off a bunch of stuff that you've had a hand in. Then what does it look like? What is it you're led into then?
Yeah, so I walked away, like I resigned that 17-year mark. I resigned from the one church I was at in Phoenix, Arizona, and I literally said, as a friend of mine invited me over to Iraq to just do some relief work with him. And I just said on the plane looking out the window, I said, God, if that is you, then I don't believe you. Because that is powerless. It takes advantage of the poor. It argues over $10,000 light bulbs and $250,000 sound system. It uses money for $70,000 windows to look at the poor. These are real conversations I'm talking about, y'all. Yeah. Like one pastor really did a building campaign to raise $70,000 to build a window. And need I mind you, we're in the heart of the city where a high concentration of the poor. And his justification from stage is, we want to be able to see the poor. End quote. That is, and people gave to this, and I was like, what in the hell are we doing? So anyway, I was like, man, I'm out. Yeah. And I was just like, Lord, you gotta show me something else. So conversely, I would have been friends with this woman by the name of Rachel Webster, who is a Messianic Jewish woman who African American. If you see her, like her dad's African American, her mom's Jewish. But anyway, she had been planting seeds in me this entire time. So I go over to Iraq. I see some very amazing things. I come back and I connect with her. And she just starts talking to me about just like the Hebraic understanding of the scriptures, a Hebraic hermeneutic, if you will. What does it mean to be messianic, understanding, Christ as the Messiah through the Hebraic lens, not through the American lens. And bro, it just felt like this was a life that Yeshua, Jesus intended, but was just kind of withheld, like you were duped. So that was right around 2016. And so from 2016 to the present, I've been on this journey of just really uncovering. Some people say Jewish or Hebraic roots movement. Depending on what you find online, it can be a little bit Zionistic. So I tend to stay away from that phrase, but it is going to, in its seriousness, it is going to the roots of the Hebraic culture, lenses, idioms, phrases, because it's the belief that if God inspired the word of God, he didn't just randomly pick a culture to disregard to just get to the salvation speech. There is this culture is influential and important for how we live life on what we say on Monday through Saturday.
And that was kind of maybe not the moment, but the season that reconnected us. We were in Birmingham at the time trying to build what we called like a interconnected faith city. What is evolved into like that language we use a lot, kingdom ecosystem, brave cities. And even back then we were talking about the cities of refuge, from the stories in Deuteronomy, leading all the way up to what did Jesus really mean when he said, go and do the things that I've taught you. So do you have any like quick, hits on the cities of refuge and how they've influenced you of how the church can function in economics, education, life together, building these tables that we talk about?
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a good question. Good reflection there. Yeah, I mean, you start reading back to the scriptures. You come to Deuteronomy, and the one thing I like about the Hebraic hermeneutic and rabbinic method is it takes it from the existential spiritual world and says, what does this look like tangibly day to day? How does it work itself out? And one of the things I was taken back by was seeing for the first time, if you take the millions of people out from this empire of Egypt, what do they tangibly need once they cross over here in this wilderness? Well, they need some instruction. So whereas for me, I saw the 10 Commandments like, oh yeah, God is trying to make them moral. It's like, no, he's not. He's just trying to give them some training wheels. Like if you think about it, without the 10 Commandments, I mean, Cain killed Abel. He didn't go to prison for that. Like there was no justice system. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like Joseph and his brothers, they're like, we're going to throw this dude in the cave. They didn't get charged for that. Not unless God came down and said something. And so I just feel like God tangibly saw as humanity continues to progress forward, if they don't have something on how to navigate with each other, they're just going to be out here killing one another. And whoever got the strongest, bow or sword at the time wins. So just reading back through that lens, you come to Deuteronomy and I'm like, oh, crazy. He told them to build cities under the majority city. If that would have been Babylon at the time, Egypt at the time, or wherever. And I never
empire,
whatever the empire is at the time, Syrians, whoever. And he describes how to build these cities. And so the first thought I had, I go, oh, we got it wrong. We've been trying to plant churches. We should have been planting cities. That's really what my first thought was. And I was like, man, there hasn't been a movement to plant cities. And so I just started knocking that around, obviously talking with Taylor, talking with one of my friends, and he connected with a guy in New Zealand who had the same thought. He built and been fleshing out his first, what I would call kingdom city in New Zealand, real thing, fleshing itself out. And so when, to Taylor's point, the cities have all the things that a church building is trying to do, but they don't worry about making it a program, right? So if you look in Deuteronomy, you can look at the Messianic communities in Corinth. You got the storehouses every 3 years. Open up your storehouse, let the poor, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner come, eat, have their fill, let them take whatever they can in the Levite. We don't have that. We don't have storehouses, so we throw the door up and say, hey, come get it. You can do that if you own the city. It talks about how to use your cattle. It talks about debt. Like when you own the city, you're not worried about leveraging debt or putting people in debt to make money because you own the city. You set the trajectory. And literally, these are all the things that I'm talking about. But this guy in New Zealand is fleshing itself out, right? So that's a tangible reality. And so as Taylor and I are knocking it around, I go, oh, what we've done is we've been so brainwashed by the empire, and we're trying to redeem the empire's methods when that wasn't the framework and the manual given to God's people.
Right.
And we wonder why it's not working. So I remember with Taylor and other guys, like, man, we got to build cities, bro. Like, I know it's crazy, but that was the first time I was like, man, the vision ain't big enough. It's not big enough.
All right. I know y'all are hankering. So jump in. What you thinking?
I ain't jumping in yet. I'm just digging it.
Well, this is to me, this is kind of a pivotal and elemental thought to this whole conversation. And it's centered around this idea that we actually, no part of our calling is to change our city or our world.
Right.
It's to build new ones that are accessible, integrated, and incarnated in the regions that we're in. I think I'll say this a lot, so this might come up often in this conversation, but the semantics of it and the nuance of it is that as the city that Jesus taught us to build grows, it inevitably makes changes where we live. So it's like, oh man, but no, my neighborhood changed. Well, I know it should, because as the kingdom expands in little pockets all over the regions where we live and where apostolic movements are happening, that the poor are going to be welcome in, the lepers are going to have a seat at the table, the oppressed and the ones under stronghold, say it again, the foreigners are going to have family again. So things do change, but it's not because we're trying to change Atlanta. There is a clear understanding that Atlanta is under the rule of empire and has kind of been given that leash. We don't want to change Atlanta. We want to build kingdom inside of Atlanta.
Like little oases that I noticed in the scripture that, like, to this point, if you look at any other Jewish, like just from the scriptures, the Jewish pockets, to this point, they never changed it. They, like, people may argue with this, but I go, Joseph didn't change. He gave direction when the famine came, but who changed or who had that relief or that oasis were the people in Goshen, right? And you just continue to flesh that out. Like then you go to Babylon, then you go with the Assyrians, then you go in Jesus' day, then you go on Paul's day. When Paul says the famous word, it's like, why are you leaving? Again, poor's translation in English, in the English translation, the ESV or NIV, but in the complete Jewish Bible or just in the original Hebraic language, he says, why are you leaving the Messianic community, that city, and going to the Roman city to have them oversee your cases? And what that says is, we talk about churches, and I go, to me, I go, churches is so low of a bar that if I wanted to right now, with all the people I'm connected to, I can grow a mega church, film it, and show people I did not need God to build a mega church. You need God to build cities because it is beyond you. And what Paul was saying when he says, why are you going outside of this? I go, it shows you right there. They had economy, they had actual judges, right? We don't have judges in churches, right? Because we give over our aid and our rule to Rome, right? And so we see that God's people is always supposed to be an oasis for food, for judicial reasons, for those who are disregarded in caste and class, right? The widows, the orphans, the foreigners. He mentioned the lepers. Also, you can have a legacy, right? So if you take Ruth, who was under the empire, Moabite, and then she, attaches herself to Naomi, and then she comes with Boaz. She doesn't just marry Boaz. Boaz gives her a legacy through children and land. These are things that these cities, these oases, this is what we're supposed to be. So if someone robs you in Rome, be like, not so. You come over here, you can get a legacy. And people should be clamoring to get to these things. And you saw that in the scriptures. So not so now, because I think we're so default hardwired to.
But you also saw in the scriptures, which translates totally to today as well, people wanting to run back to Egypt.
Yeah.
Because of,
I just think it's
kind of
hard.
the
Well, they said it's easier. It was
progression.
easier to be,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so as
It's
you're,
easier in their framework. Yeah.
well, yeah, and it's uncharted out here. I'm curious if people are listening to this and go, all right, so you're talking about building a city, owning a city, having ownership over it like this. The vision is so large, right?
Mhm.
Let's just say I put myself in the shoes of someone that goes, okay, that it's paralyzing. Like I go, oh man, like what? And I like that. You're like, no, because to do that, you actually need God. So, but I'm curious about, like, let's just say like this, like seedlings. So if someone's saying, all right, Adam, so what, like I'm here in, I don't know, this town in Kansas or whatever, and I want to put this into practice.
Yeah.
Talk to me about like the seedlings.
Yes. So that's a good question. So I always do the testing on myself. And I challenged my wife with this when she wanted to look at getting a house. I said, we're not going to look at square foot. We're not going to look at plots. We're looking at acres. And so I said, if we're not talking acres, we're not talking kingdom mindset. Because on acres, you can build other structures and you can house people, right? So I had my first like mini garden, and we had like squash blossoms, broccoli, and lettuce that we pulled from it. We put an extra room in there. Taylor, slept in their bathroom to where we house people who are on their spiritual journey, right? So I'll use myself in my house, right? At the same time, I picked up bow hunting and learned how to butcher and skin and quarter out. And I use that meat to service people who are in need and service other people to bring fellowship, food, and fellowship. Like, I'm just like, this is awful, just right off of the land, right here. And so people are like, oh, damn. And I go, I'm not balling out here, but I'm using what I have. And so now, then you have people like, they're like, oh, man, can you scale this up? Like, one crew wanted to toss me out of Texas, but, they're being cheap, and then they wanted to use me. I'm like, bro, you can't use me. Like, you got to pay me what I'm worth. They wanted me to write the curriculum, but they didn't want to pay me. And I'm like, nah, I don't go down like that. So for me, what I tell people, I go, first, you got to change your mindset. You got to change your mindset from square feet to acres. Now, I know how much, it's 49,000 square feet in an acre. So I go, when you say it to someone like that, you're like, damn, you get 49,000 square feet? Yeah, you can. And Taylor hears me say this all the time. I go, there's a lot of places for sale, but Georgia is the place that's for sale. Like, obviously, you can go to like the Oklahomas and places like that. But to me, Georgia is intriguing because it's a city that people want to move to, but you also can get acreage at a low cost. But in a lot of people's minds, they want square foot because they just want to get in a home that's comfortable. They're not trying to work the land. They're not trying to be an oasis. They say, hey, church, you do that. I just want to sleep. So to answer your question, I go, people actually have to change their mindset, their work ethic, their self-centeredness, their hedonism, pleasure seeking. There's a lot of stuff you just got to rewire because the empire says you work to keep things at a distance instead of, no, I work to bring things close, people close. And that's the American mindset. You don't get all these degrees to share your life with people. Not an American mindset.
Right.
You got Adam, you got a tractor?
Do I? No, I don't. I need to get one, but I don't have.
So I got 3,920,000 square feet.
No, see, you talking to me. Talk to me nice, Hugh.
I need a tractor for that. Hey, so this morning, like just right before this webinar, there was a Facebook post by a pretty well-known pastor asking the question, how do you move a consumeristic church to a more missional posture? And I can't respond because my initial thoughts are, well, you can't. There's no possible way. You can only adjust the mindset and the behavior of one person in that church, and then that begins to potentially move. But I know a lot of people listening to this, they're probably in agreement with us that we can't just sort of gloss up the pig and call it something else. Like there's Taylor and I talk all the time about pearls before swine. Like what Jesus really meant there is like, you just can't make minor tweaks and get there. This has to be like a full scale, like an absolutely like pull your muscles off your bone type of renovation that happens. Would you agree with that? Or do you think we can baby step our way into this? The back end of the book that Taylor and I are working on, it literally calls people to come out of her, coming out of, you gotta come out of Babylon to live in this other city. You can't it's almost like ridiculous to think that many of the churches that we've grown up in, they're still trying to get Babylon to like sanction them and to link them. And like we want to be more and more like Babylon. And I never thought we'd see that in our day, but it's like that's the primary evangelical stream right now. So what we're talking about is 10 degrees removed from any of that. So do you think it's a full scale, like you got to come out of that old system before you're really gonna get onto this thing?
Let me add one thought before you answer that, because I'm going to tee you up. So little part of my story, 2010, I'm wrestling through this Revelation 18, come out of her, lest you take part in her sins. I go through some kind of experience, like maybe like a vision or a dream or something. I'm seeing rocks falling, and I write about this in the book, Petra, people trying to find places of refuge. And I hear in my spirit, hear like a thought in my head, where are they going to go if the cities aren't built? So like, even as you're talking, Hugh, and you're talking about this, pulling the muscle off the bone, this is a drastic change. I think it's important to kind of insert into your response, like the idea of city builders, because one reason this is so overwhelming for so many people, think of the innovation bell curve, innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, is because a lot of this conversation is for the innovators, AKA the city builders. So when you like responding to that, respond maybe a little bit with that in mind.
Yeah, so I think, to Taylor's point, I do think there are those Joshua and Caleb's who like, look, we can take the land and we can build this. And then there's the, let's just say it's 2% as you reference. And then there's the 98% to where they're like, I'll go if it's built, But I also probably would challenge them to say, it's better to be in the wilderness, not knowing when you're gonna get to the promised land, to be in Egypt waiting for the promised land to be legit. That's what I'm on. And if you look at Jewish culture during that time, the Lord said, look, I'm telling you, you just need to leave. He ain't say leave milk and honey. He ain't even telling that till later. You know what he did provide for them? And they celebrate this festival. It's called the Feast of Booths. And he said, why you out here? We're going to make tents out here. No, this ain't the promised land. But this tent is better than the empire. And this is why I tell people, I go, this tent away from the empire is better than empire. And a lot of people's like, man, I can't live in this tent, bro. Okay. Then, and so even if we're talking about the city builders, I believe, like, yeah, there's certain builders. But I would say every disciple who's trying to find God, if you ain't trying to live in the wilderness of the tent, just say like, yo, it's too hard. Give me Egypt and Pharaoh. And that's really at the end of the day what people are saying. Like,
that's a ground shaking word, man.
Yeah, like if you want to get started, you got to at least learn how to live in a tent.
Yes.
And if you just can't.
Is that, so when y'all hear that, does that kind of make y'all want to give up?
No,
makes them want to get up.
I love it.
It does.
To get a pimped out tent.
Ain't nobody living in the tent.
you know what though,
Let's
but no,
just
what's
go-
funny is I literally,
let's just go
as
to
you were
Vegas.
describing that, I'm thinking of this buddy of mine that, now this isn't true anymore, but for like a decade straight, this is an older man, lived in a tent here in the city. You know, we work a lot with folks that are on the streets, and he started working with us. His name was Richard, and Richard would drive our truck and do pickups for us. And I kept trying to like, hey man, you know, do you want like, you want to stay at this? We actually had a house that he could live in. He's like, nah, I'm good. And then we had like I remember I got a bunch of clothes in, like nice new clothes. And I was like, hey, you want some clothes? Like, nah, I'm good. But as you were talking about it, I just kept thinking of him because it was really interesting. But he had this, like, this was one of the most content people I've ever known. He was not like, this was not some expression of poverty as in lack of freedom. This was one of the freest dudes I've ever met. Like, he was like, I'm good, actually. And I don't want to get all caught up in the addictions to comfort and the addictions to security and those kind of things that are going to seduce me into a kind of captivity or dependence on those things. I'm good out here, actually, in a tent. And so, like, literally was picturing this dude with this long braided beard as you were talking, because I'm like, he was doing exactly that. Like, it is better in the tent than in captivity. It is better in the tent than under empire. And actually, I want to just, while I'm saying this, like, back to, so I asked you a question about the seeds. Like, someone's like, and I think and then as Hugh said, like, someone posted, like, how do you make this kind of transition? What I heard, like, when you were talking about kind of the Hebrew people, you said, like, the cult, like, it wasn't like they picked this people and then set the culture aside, right? But you said the culture is influential, the culture is important. And I asked you a question and you went to mindset. Right. And then as he was talking about, but I'm like, oh, this is actually all that, right? Kingdom is actually a culture. Like, you know, by the way, yeast is a culture. Like, a little yeast works through that whole thing that Jesus used. Like, that's a culture act technically. And I actually think, like, at some level you're saying, no, well, at the heart of this, you need to be inoculated with this culture, even if it means living in obscurity, leaving behind what you know, taking a major risk. In fact, that's part of the culture.
And it makes, you ever realized how much what Jesus taught and said starts to make sense when looked at through the lens of kingdom culture? Like, just the idea of, you cannot love the world. Someone who loves the world, the love of the Father cannot be in him. This is not an idea of, like, you're a bad person for loving the world. It's the idea of warning, like a father would give his son, like, you cannot jump in that pool. You're not bad for doing it. You can't. You're gonna die. You try to love both of these things. One is inevitably, even a small amount of leaven, you know.
A little, this has been a pretty amazing, like, more apostolic type of talk. But, like, I was just saying a little bit, and this is not my bent, but a little shepherding pastoral word. I'm just thinking back to all those folks in their tents between Egypt and Promised Land. There at least were a lot of other tents around them. So they're at least in community. So when they're griping and complaining, they can bitch to the dude, you know, next door. A lot of the leaders, a lot of the leaders, though, that, like, we're with, even why we're setting up this whole network, is we think a lot of these guys are out by themselves in their tent. They don't see anybody else doing this, so that starts to make them think, well, I'm losing my mind, I miss this.
Absolutely.
And I feel like in due time, it's our hopes that there will be so many tents. The late adopters, it won't be quite as hard for them. We will have learned how to live in the tent, and we can help them. And the transition won't be as brutal, but that's why I always feel like right now, the men and women that are charting out this course, I just think are unbelievable. They do it and they stick with it, because most of them, there's nobody else to look at.
I think, to your point, so I always ask this question to, like, some of my friends. and I'll ask it to y'all. I mean, it's a rhetorical question, so you know the answer. But do people know when they're living out history, right? Like, do you ever think a person knows, like, you know what? This Montgomery bus boycott, they gonna write this one in the history books. You know what I'm saying? Or, yo, we in the wilderness, this is gonna be in the scriptures. So, you know, like, I don't think people know. And I say that to say is, when we're talking about this, we're living on what I would call a spiritual history in America, to where we're saying, let's just say, plant cities over churches, and you'll find the church in the kingdom city. Basically, is what we're saying. But it's the first of its kind. Just go from today backwards. This has not been a rhetoric. And the only reason I say that is, if that's true, then these people who need to be intense also need a beacon, right? The whole history of a logo. The logo is, hey, when I see Nike, just do it, right? Yeah. I know what that means. It's the hero within. And so what y'all are doing with this podcast is historic in the sense of, we assume that there are other beacons, but they're not. And what I was pushing on one of my friends is, I said, we cannot say we're about this, but then aren't willing to come public out of the closet and say, here we are. And that's what led to, you know, Hugh's point. That's what led, you know, Elijah, like, yo, kill me, because ain't nobody else out there. Yeah. There was no beacon. And God had to say, the 7,000's over there. So I think what y'all are doing is trying to show where other people are, but make no mistake, there are a lot of Elijahs that don't know the other Elijahs exist.
That's right.
Yeah, that's good.
You see what I'm saying? So as y'all keep shining this beacon, they'll get off the island, because it's not that they want to be on the island, they just don't know.
Well, and honestly, I mean, God, it's so true. Like, in my own experience, like, finding these guys, Adam, meeting you even now, like, it's so medicinal, like, in terms of just like, it's therapeutically addressing a kind of like these relationships are so valuable and important, because it's affirming, it's validating. You're not and say God is actually at work doing something, tapping y'all. But like, but even us doing this in a little bit's an effort to go, man, like, we need to grow this network. Like even just thinking about back to you talking about like the kind of the Hebrew people, like, they get scattered. And there's like the diaspora effect of that is like, you know, there needs to be some way to network that diaspora back together to really realize the power of that people, right? Like, it can exist in these micro pockets, but there is like that kind of that larger component, that larger culture that we're maybe emulating or rehearsing or imagining could exist, but in reality, when we find each other, we might actually be able to crowdsource this reality a little bit together, you know?
I'm glad you said the word rehearsing. I think a good thought for not a conclusion of this conversation, but a good thought to kind of undergird this is, we can't be governed by the pursuit of perfection in this moment. I was even sharing with Adam this morning how I still wrestle in this entitlement of reward for my labor. Like, I want to see the outcome. I can't mentally get to a place yet where I'm comfortable with building the ark if I don't get to see the rain. That's beyond my level of faithfulness currently in my life. And so I'm doing some of my own soul work to be delivered from this pursuit of perfection, that we might build some of the most broken and floundering cities in this kind of heralding of this ancient call of building cities, in hopes that maybe there's a legacy, maybe there's some who come after us and build better cities.
But it's out there.
Hey, while you guys are sitting there hanging with Lecrae and the guys, can you get the Brave City manuscript to Adam and have him like make sure we're locked in on all this Jewish history in that second chapter? Okay, so, because that needs to reflect this conversation today, or I think we miss a lot. So,
Yeah. And right after this, Lecrae and I are doing a freestyle session of just on the no. Yes.
yeah, I'm sending you my other country song lyrics that you guys can work in. I got them right here.
Yeah, he's gonna he'll have it in his hands. So yeah, I think maybe that's even a good, not like John wrap us up, but a place to give me courage to keep moving forward is, I think the way of empire is actually a demand of perfection. I don't think that's the way of the kingdom.
I agree. Yeah.
I think the way of the kingdom is a willingness to go through the wilderness, knowing you might not make it into the promised land. And you're going to make some boneheaded moves along the way. And to maybe we can like speak that courage into city builders, like, hey fellas, hey ladies, we probably aren't going to build great cities yet, but we're trying to, like, what do you always say, John? Like we're blind dudes giving directions in the fog.
I mean, yeah, the image in my mind is always just walking down the hallway trying to find the corner or whatever, just groping my way down.
More drunk blind dudes. As we have always said, in each one of these gray papers sessions, we got to think of the title based on what we've talked about. So we title it after. I'd like to throw it out. I think it's before or as you're building a city, you got to first learn how to live in a tent, something like that.
No, yeah. Learning how to live in a tent. Going back to Taylor's mindset, John Ford, when he talked to the disciples, like, hey, I'm going to bring you into a harvest that you had nothing to do with, because the sower and the reaper will rejoice together. And I believe, and hear me on this, the American mindset has so hijacked our default framework. So, look,
We're losing you guys.
I'm out. Re-say that whole thing, because
we lost.
Oh well, God bless them. We'll see you soon. Thanks for doing this, John.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Appreciate y'all. See you, man.